The fox fur collar. It was hot in the church that Sunday morning, and the lazy paddle fans on the ceiling did little more than to agitate the wasps buzzing around up there, while down below, Preacher Mangum shouted on about hellfire and brimstone and pounded on that pulpit every minute or so and jolted awake those in the congregation who dared to doze. Ladies waved paper fans with pictures of Jesus at the door or Moses and the Ten Commandments on them, fanning themselves or sleeping children on their laps. And children sitting in the pews drew pictures on their Sunday school books or played with their shoes. Men sat stiff beside their wives in starched white shirts and ties, wiggling sticky toes in tight dress shoes. And some of the women stared at Mary Jones, wondering just when she was going to have that baby. Her belly stuck out like a watermelon under her dress. Mary Nell Pickard held tight to the arm of the balding man beside her, newlywed and sitting so close you couldn't slide a dollar bill between their hips, although most of the women thought Jim Pickard was up to no good, being an outsider from Texas and all. Miss Mattie Heath sat at the piano picking at her long fingernails, and there was a faint click each time she did. Mattie kept her nails so long because she liked the way they ticked on the ivories when she played. She wore big rings on her fingers to enhance the effect and spangly bracelets on her wrists. Rosella Thorpe sat thinking of the Sunday lunch she would be serving to the family just as soon as this long-winded old fart of a preacher got done. She sat still in her purple suit, although her thighs were sweating and she hoped her sweat wouldn't stain the backside of her linen skirt. Her patent leather purse sat beside Bob, her husband of 50 years, as he dozed quietly, head bowed as if in fervent prayer, wearing his only black suit and blue tie. Around Rosella's own neck hung her newest acquisition and prized possession from the J.C. catalog, attached to her linen suit with her mama's fine cameo pin. It was a fox fur collar, complete with tail and head. It had beady little eyes that stared blankly at Bob. The day it had come in the mail, she had pranced about the house in her bathrobe with it draped around her neck and showed it to every one of the women in the ladies' group and wore it any time she possibly could. Rosella was beginning to perspire around the area of her neck where the fox fur collar touched her skin, and she turned her head a bit from side to side and wiggled her shoulders. She did not realize that when she moved, the little face of the creature wiggled up and down as if it were alive and was trying to break free from her. On the pew behind Rosella sat Mosley Thompson on a wide bench he shared with old Ed Pruitt, sitting on the other end so as to allow Ed room to elevate his bad leg. Mosley had been dozing, fighting off the throes of a hangover from a bottle of whiskey he had consumed the night before at a roadhouse up the way. But Mosley snapped to attention when the preacher pounded on the pulpit again and shouted, and the first thing he saw when he looked around were the beady little eyes of that fox face on Miss Rosella's shoulder. And just at that moment, Miss Rosella moved, and the little head bobbed up and down. Mosley stared at it, blinking his eyes as the fox's perky little ears and nose seemed to wiggle at him in a menacing way. And Mosley, in one of his worst moments ever, jumped to his feet and grabbed that fox fur collar by its scrawny little neck and screamed out that he'd got it not to worry Miss Rosella, and before she knew what was happening, he'd yanked that collar off her neck and she cried out. The linen of her collar ripped clean off her jacket, and her mama's cameo brooch went flying off into the air. The church was on its feet as Mosley limped for the door, shaking the collar in both hands. He went tumbling down the stairs as people ran after him. Across the pews at the piano, Miss Mattie caught the brooch midair like a catcher in the World Series when it came flying her direction. Just then the preacher shouted, "Praise Jesus!" and several of the men went racing out after Mosley and stood watching him wrestle in the dirt with that dead fox collar. He kicked and stomped at it until one of its beady little eyes flew off into the bushes and he'd torn its tail clear off. During all this, Bob stood on the steps of the church, leaning against the stair rail, arms crossed with a sly grin on his face. He never did like that thing from the moment it came in the mail. Poor Miss Rosella was stretched out on the bench. A group of ladies fanned her as she moaned. Babies woke up crying and newlyweds kissed, and Mary Jones shouted that the baby was coming. When old Ed Pruitt tried to stand up off the bench, a wasp swooped down from the ceiling and stung him right on top of his bald head as Miss Maddie pounded out Onward Christian Soldiers on the piano, her long nails ticking on the keys. And above it all, Preacher Mangum said, "I'm in."